Questions of Doom.
Hello and welcome back to another Questions of Doom. In this series, as ever, I attempt to answer questions that you send my way using the archaeosoup@gmail.com email address, as displayed on the YouTube channel homepage, but also, as you'll see, at the end of this video. In answering these questions by video, it is my fond hope that the answer is not only useful to the person who asks the question, but also anyone else out there who may be wondering the same thing, or something similar. Now, today's question is with regards to the famous site of Troy in Anatolia, and it goes something like this. Hello, Archaeosoup. What are your opinions on the possibility of the Trojan War being real? From archaeological evidence as well as written sources, including the Iliad, Odyssey, etc. And I would like to say I love everything you share and post, and it really helped me with my A-level archaeology, which I'm planning to continue to university soon. Thank you very much, and I hope you continue doing this. Well, so do I. Thank you very much. Calga14, YouTube user. Well, Calga14, I'm glad that you find Archaeosoup useful, but more than this, I am very pleased that you asked this question. This is a question which arguably is one of the earliest questions ever asked in archaeology. Infamously, Heinrich Schliemann, the sort of proto-archaeologist, excavated at the site of Troy, is seeking out these stories which had enthralled him as a boy. And between 1871 and 1874, we are told, he dug feverishly, discovered the so-called Priam's treasure, which his wife wore in a photo. And as far as he was concerned, yes, he had discovered Troy. Case closed. Wonderful. And more to the point, he went there because he was trying to answer the question as to whether or not there had been a Trojan War. This was a time when people were starting to look for example, archaeological evidence of biblical happenings and also stories from the classical world as well. So, yes, this is one of the oldest questions in early archaeology, and therefore archaeology, and it's one well worth answering. Now, I have had to make extensive notes, so therefore I'll be looking down quite a bit in this video. I've referred to a few different people, including Manfred Kaufmann, a couple of essays, and also Michael Wood's In Search of the Trojan War. So, yeah, if you want to have a look at those. In fact, I recommend Michael Wood's book because it's just a good read anyway. Now then, was there a Trojan War? Well, surprisingly, actually, excavations at Troy haven't really been, for the most part, trying to answer that question. And what they're actually trying to do, and indeed next year there'll be another excavation beginning on the site, is trying to actually understand what life was like in the Bronze Age settlement of Troy all the way through. There have been many different periods of settlement, ranging in intensity, in the strength of the city, and also all the way through actually up until the Byzantine period. So there's an awful lot to ask, and the Trojan War is one question which actually hasn't all that much been focused on. Now, the first settlement in the area was around 3000 BC. And it continued, as I say, all the way up until the Byzantine Empire in AD 1400 or thereabouts. They resulted in a mound of roughly 30 feet in height in relation to the plain surrounding. That's about 10 metres tall, so it's essentially a sort of tell settlement almost, just built up through many periods of occupation over time. Now, there were two major destruction periods destruction events in the period that the Iliad and Odyssey make reference to. The first one is the early 13th century BC, which existed actually since the 17th century BC. So for quite a long time that settlement was there, and then it was destroyed in a fairly major event. The second one was actually in the early 12th century BC. These respectively are Troy 6 and 7. Now, citadel fortifications from this time included 12-foot thick walls, which were 27 feet high, limestone walls topped in mud brick, very impressive structures. So clearly this was a city of import. Having said that, there's also much evidence around this time for conflagration, that is burning events, major burning events, skeletons, and also heaps of sling bullets. In other words, munitions left where they are, which indicates possibly that the people who had the munitions lost whatever battle it was. because if you win, you tend to then put your munitions away. If you're defeated, your conqueror doesn't really give a monkey's where you left your things. So, in that sense, yes, it looks like there's a big thing happened, at least twice, if not more times, and one of these big things resulted in the people inside losing quite conclusively. Now, the main argument against the idea of this event, or these events being the Trojan Wars, is that for many people, Troy was not a major place to be. It wasn't a particularly important town or city. However, this citadel, this massive, important, impressive structure, is unparalleled in the region, and therefore would have had a major influence on, for example, access to the Black Sea from the Mediterranean. So it clearly was an important place. So you can possibly discount that argument, the idea, it was a village, didn't really matter. That's not true. I mean, the more archaeology which has been done, the more it indicates actually that this was a major settlement. Now, there's also been the verification of a lower portion to the city of Troy, as it were. In the 17th to early 12th centuries BC, there was a whole area below the main citadel area, which was surrounded by an impressive ditch, defensive works. This was an occupied area, fairly densely occupied, and again points to it being a large settlement, which was also primed for war. So it's looking good for there being some sort of Trojan conflict, or something which might be referred to as Trojan conflict. Now, what about Homer? Now, Homer took for granted, he assumed that his audience knew of the Trojan conflict. He simply used the Trojan War as a setting for his story about Achilles and his rage, and how the rage of Achilles affected the relationship between men and gods, and also the relationship between the Greeks and the Trojans, the Achaeans and those of Ilios. So, in that sense, he assumed that this had happened, and actually, when he was writing around the close of the 8th century BC, the ruins of Troy were still rather impressive, and there were, for example, sites which could be the sanctuary, the holy area, which he refers to in the Iliad, which he would have seen this and gone, oh, well, that's clearly a great place for this event to occur, or this. So, many of the things which he refers to could actually have been inspired by the ruins which he would have seen in the area. Indeed, him and his contemporaries, stories would have got back to him about this area. For example, there's even some evidence of a weaker fourth wall on the complex, which is referred to in the Iliad. So these things are likely actually to be set in, inspired by real archaeology and real ruins, if not by real events. So in that sense, there's nothing archaeological to contradict the idea that Troy and the area saw a major conflict around about the time that Homer's talking about. So he's referring back to the 12th century, he was writing in the 8th century. There's nothing really that contradicts that idea. So what was this? What does this mean? What were the origins, actually, possibly of this tension? Well, the Hittites, actually, they make reference to Troy as being a capital of the area or the kingdom of Wilusa. And they make reference to Wilusa being ruled by a guy called Alexandros, which was another name for Paris, or named Paris being the son of Priam in the Iliad. So, again, it's all kind of circumstantial evidence that points to people actually taking Troy seriously, and there being someone possibly who could have inspired the character of Paris. The Egyptians knew about the city, the Hittites, as I say, knew about the city, and they even make reference to political and military tensions in treaties and in agreements between the two major powers. They talk about the Hittites and the Ahiawans, which could actually be the origin of the word, or rather another version of the word, the Achaeans, which Homer uses interchangeably with Greeks. The Greeks and the Achaeans and the Ahiwahans, Ahiyawans rather, could actually all be the same word. So even the Hittites, it seems, are referring possibly to the Achaeans and therefore to the Greeks, and a conflict between the two of them as dated roughly between the 13th and the 12th century BC. This is the time, supposedly, of Homer's Iliad and the Trojan Wars. So, what we have, therefore, is a site of major building, a major occupation site, which was accustomed to defending itself, which has been attacked over many, many different, different events throughout several occupation phases. There have been certainly at least one major event which resulted in burning, dead bodies. Both Homer and his contemporaries would have been able to see the ruins of Troy, and also the Hittites and therefore Homer make reference to something having happened a few centuries before Homer. They talk about potentially the Achaeans. They talk about Wilusa, which could be again another word connected with Ilios and the Iliad. Therefore, the evidence is looking good. And as Manfred Kaufmann quite rightly concludes in his excellent article, actually, and I'll put a link to it in the information bar below, the onus really now should be on people to prove that it didn't happen. Because ultimately this simply could be, the Iliad that is, could be the result of several conflict events being whittled down into one major event in the communal mind, the communal memory, I suppose, of past events. It could be a series of events which are collectively referred to as the Trojan War, or it could be actually the memory of a single massive event. Now, whether or not the details were precisely as in the Iliad, for example, a 10-year conflict, a wooden horse in the Odyssey, or, for example, the idea of Helen launching 1,000 ships, is probably not true. But it's all probably based very much in a folk memory, or possibly based in a folk memory of a real event. And therefore, as Manfred Kaufmann suggests, maybe the onus should be on asking, well, why not? Why didn't it happen? Prove that these major things, that this evidence does not mean that something happened which had an effect on the minds and the stories of people 400 years later. And I think that's a great place to end, actually. That's a great place to stop, in so much as Troy clearly inspired something, and something might have happened or must have happened to have inspired that. And the archaeological evidence seems to point to that. So there you go. Hopefully that's gone some way to answering your question, Calga 14. Thank you very much for asking. I'm very pleased to have been able to tackle the question of Troy. It's a biggie. It's one of the biggest and first questions in all of archaeology, and it's one which probably will never really be resolved. And ultimately, actually, as well, archaeologists are more interested at the moment in trying to understand what it was like to live there, not just how it ended, as it were, or how different periods of Troy ended. So the research, which is beginning next year, may well add a little bit to this story, but also crucially will explore and expand the area of excavation to cover more of this massive site of Troy. So there you go. Thank you very much. Oh, I can hear a police engine or something, police car, fire engine. Oh, there you go, they're gone. So ultimately, thank you very much once again for asking the question, Calga 14. I think that, that the evidence points to something having happened, certainly, and as Manfred Kaufmann says, once again, why not? There you go. If you have any thoughts or queries or comments on this topic, feel free to comment below, add to the discussion, and ultimately, until next time, look after yourselves and goodbye.